Good evening and welcome. Tonight I invite you to journey with me to a distant chapter in history, a time of shadows, secrets, and quiet acts of courage, a time when the Philippines stood on the precipice of revolution, and when ordinary men and women risked everything for freedom. We will slowly drift through the daily struggles of the rise and fall of a leader named Andres Bor, the hidden codes and mysteries of the and finally, we will step into the opulent world of the Spanish friars who lived comfortably, while revolution simmered around them. Let us begin ... and allow your mind to gently wander. What it was really like to be a Katipunero, soft voice, slow pacing, close your eyes, breathe gently, and let yourself drift back to the Philippines. In the year 1896, the air is heavy with heat. The sound of cicadas echoes softly through the trees. Banana leaves sway in the wind. Smoke rises from distant cooking fires. But beneath this peaceful scene, there is fear, there is hope, and there is quiet rebellion. Perhaps a rice farmer, a carpenter, a fisherman along the Pasig River. The days were long, the sun unforgiving, the work endless. You paid taxes to the Spanish authorities. You owed Labor and Apollo y Servicio, forced to build roads, bridges, and buildings. Without pay, your harvest was often taken for tribute. The friars ruled your town. Their words were low, their power absolute. You bowed your head. But inside, you quietly dreamed of freedom. One day, a friend approached you in secret. In a hushed voice, under the cover of night, he spoke of the Katipunan, a secret brotherhood, a movement to break free from Spain. You hesitated. The risk was immense. If caught, torture, prison, death. But your heart burned, and so you agreed. You were brought to a secret hut deep within the forest. Inside, oil lamps flickered. The air smelled of burning incense and damp wood. A table stood before you, simple but sacred. Atop it lay a triangle made of white cloth. Beside it, a small dagger. Bonifacio stood at the center, his eyes sharp, his voice calm. One by one, you and others stepped forward. A small cut was made on your arm. The blood dripped onto the paper, sealing your name. Ako'y nanunumpa saya Katipunan. Andang yalayang haking boy para sa kalayahang enehe inang bayang. You are now a full brother of the Katip. From that day forward, every step you took carried risk. By day, you worked your farm, pretending to be like everyone else. By night, you attended secret meetings in the forests and hills. You learned codes, secret handshakes, hidden messages disguised in letters. Meetings were called by whispers. Magida tayo sa ilalim enehipunon manga, ikawilo enehigabi. The Guardia civil patrolled the streets. Spanish soldiers questioned anyone they suspected. Informants lurked everywhere. You kept your head down in town, but your ears were always open. Your hands always close to your bolo, your sharp jungle knife. At night, every sound in the forest stirred you awake. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of bamboo leaves, the snap of a twig. Friend or enemy, you lived each day on the edge of fear. Food was scarce. Supplies were few. Sometimes you ate only boiled sweet potatoes, dried fish, or wild fruits gathered from the forest. You shared what little you had with your brothers. Weapons were even harder to find. Some carried old rifles, rusty, unreliable. Many fought with balos, sharpened spears, and even sharpened sticks. Gunpowder was precious. Bullets were counted one by one. You practiced with your blade daily, swinging at banana trunks, perfecting your aim. The forest became your home, your shelter, your battlefield, and your graveyard. Every root and tree was familiar to your eyes. The twisting paths of narrow trails became etched in your memory. You knew which creeks left no footprints if you walked carefully, and which vines could be used to scale small cliffs or hide your presence from patrolling soldiers. The thick canopy above offered protection from the harsh tropical sun and from the eyes of the Guardia Civil. Dense undergrowth muffled your footsteps, allowing you to move silently. The forest whispered constantly, rustling leaves, distant bird calls, the low hum of insects filling the humid air. At night, the world transformed. The moonlight filtered through gaps in the leaves, casting silver beams across the jungle floor. The stars blinked gently above, and the chirping of crickets accompanied your cautious steps as you patrolled the perimeter of your hidden camp. Every sound demanded your attention. The rains came often and without warning. Tropical downpours turned dirt trails into thick, sticky mud that swallowed your feet with every step. Your clothes clung to your body, soaked and heavy. Leeches latched onto your legs, and swarms of mosquitoes relentlessly attacked any exposed skin. You learned to endure the bites, the stings, the itching that never seemed to stop. With the rain came sickness. Malaria spread like wildfire. Fevers burned through your body. Chills rattled your bones. Dysentery took others quickly, weakening them until they could no longer keep up. There were no doctors here, no medicine, only the resilience of your body and the care of your fellow Catepineros to keep you alive. Even in the company of your brothers, trust was fragile. Betrayal lurked in every corner. You watched carefully. Who spoke too freely? Who avoided eye contact? Who disappeared from meetings without explanation? Fear of informants was constant, and the Spanish offered rewards to anyone who would reveal your location. Sometimes, those you called brothers were dragged from their homes in the middle of the night. The Guardia Civil arrived without warning, armed and merciless. Screams echoed through the silent villages, as men were beaten, bound, and hauled away for interrogation, never to return. You heard these stories whispered under the trees, each one a grim reminder of your own peril. You slept lightly, always half awake, listening for the rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig that could signal danger. A dog barking in the distance, the flutter of a startled bird. Even the wind shifting could jolt you upright, bolo in hand, ready for whatever came next. Despite the danger, you trained. Bolos were sharpened daily, swinging in precise arcs against banana tree trunks to build strength and accuracy. Some were lucky to have old rifles, relics from past conflicts, often unreliable and prone to jamming. Gunpowder was scarce. Every bullet was precious and counted carefully before each mission. The battles, when they came, were swift and brutal. Guerrilla tactics ruled the day. You struck from the shadows, ambushing Spanish patrols, vanishing into the dense jungle before they could organize a The sharp crack of gunfire, the metallic ring of blades clashing, and the agonized cries of wounded men filled the humid air before fading back into silence. After each skirmish, you and your comrades melted back into the safety of the forest. The fallen were buried quickly, sometimes hastily, covered with leaves and branches if time was short. The wounded were carried on makeshift stretchers, their groans muffled to avoid drawing attention from nearby patrols. News from home arrived occasionally, smuggled through secret couriers. Small pieces of paper, hidden in baskets of produce or sewn into clothing, carried the words of your loved ones. Your wife spoke of your children growing stronger. Your mother offered prayers for your safety, lighting candles nightly in front of her humble altar. As much as you longed to write back, you knew better. The risk was too great. The Spanish monitored letters, interrogated anyone who might carry messages. Silence, though painful, was the safest protection you could offer your family. The thought of them kept you going. Every hardship, every cold night on damp jungle soil, every lost comrade weighed heavy on your heart. Yet you clung to the vision of a future free from colonial chains. A life where your children could grow as free Filipinos under the sun of a liberated nation. You reminded yourself of the injustices you had suffered. The unbearable taxes that drained your harvest. The priest who humiliated your uncle in the town plaza. The forced labor that stole years of your youth. These memories fueled your resolve. And so, you endured, you hid, you fought, you waited. Some days passed without incident. Others brought whispers of advancing Spanish troops or news of captured brothers. You prepared for each possibility with steady hands and silent prayers. The jungle grew quieter as you sat beneath a massive tree, listening to the gentle rustle of its leaves. Fireflies floated lazily through the night air. The familiar sounds of the forest wrapped around you like a blanket, lulling your tired body into brief moments of rest. The hours often blended together, as if time itself grew tired of keeping track. Dawn's first light often found you already awake, watching the dim horizon as fog lazily lifted from the jungle floor. The smell of damp earth mixed with the faint scent of smoke from distant village fires. These quiet moments felt like borrowed time, peaceful yet heavy with the knowledge that danger never fully slept. When rations allowed, you shared simple meals with your companions beneath the trees. Steamed rice, dried fish, root crops, like cassava or gabi. Humble food that filled your belly just enough to continue. Occasionally, a wild chicken or boar provided a rare feast, but more often, you survived on what little the jungle offered. Water was drawn from hidden springs, cold and clean, though not always easy to find. The sharp eye of a seasoned katipunero could spot where the ferns grew thickest, a sure sign of nearby moisture. But during the dry seasons, even water became a daily search, and many suffered under the oppressive heat. Despite the hardship, small comforts kept your spirit alive. You whispered quiet prayers before meals, fingers forming the sign of the cross in the faint light. Some men carried tiny medallions of the Virgin Mary or wands hidden beneath their shirts, a silent plea for protection as each day unfolded. Evenings were reserved for planning, gathered beneath makeshift shelters of woven palm leaves. You and your brothers spoke in hushed tones. Bonifacio's messengers brought word of the larger fight, who had risen, who had fallen, and which provinces stirred with rebellion. Maps were drawn in dirt, battle plans sketched by lamplight. Sometimes there were new recruits, young men filled with nervous excitement, eyes wide as they received their first ball. Older Catapenaros taught them how to hold the blade, how to strike, and most importantly, how to remain unseen. But not every brother could withstand the weight of this life. Fear claimed many long before bullets did. Some disappeared into the night, unable to bear the constant dread of betrayal, starvation, or capture. Their absence was rarely spoken of aloud. The Spanish authorities grew increasingly brutal. The Guardia civil's patrols expanded, informants infiltrated towns, even families. Rewards were offered for names, locations, secrets. The price for betrayal grew, but so did the desperation of some who faced hunger or threats against their loved ones. You heard stories of entire families imprisoned, because one member was suspected of joining the wives beaten, children threatened, elderly parents humiliated. The Spanish wanted to break not only the fighters, but the families who dared to support them. And still, you fought. Each brother who fell was another reason to endure. The dream of Colonial, freedom, burned fiercely in your chest, a small flame against the vast shadow of empire. Some nights, as the forest grew still, you thought of Manila, that distant city of wealth and power. You imagined the grand stone houses, the wide plazas where friars walked in, fine robes, the government buildings where laws were written against your people. It felt like another world entirely. The friars, the frails, were perhaps the most powerful of all. They controlled the land, the education, the very souls of your people. Their wealth was built on your labor, their comfort on your suffering. Even your language and history were slowly erased under their rule. Yet in the shadows, your brothers found ways to resist beyond the sword. Secret schools taught the forbidden tongue, Filipino. Poems and songs spread quietly, carrying the spirit of revolution in words that could not be silenced. Bayan ko sa aking mga kabata. The voices of Rizal and Bonifacio whispered through every hidden gathering. Bonifacio himself remained a symbol among you. Though distant, his resolve guided your steps. Stories of his bravery, his leadership, and his unshakable commitment to the cause reached even the deepest camps. You drew strength from his defiance. But the enemy adapted. Ambushes grew more frequent. Spanish soldiers began to hire local guides who knew your trails. Several camps fell when their locations were revealed, forcing constant movement. The jungle offered safety, but it was never permanent. Even the weather seemed to conspire against you. Monsoon storms flooded rivers, forcing you to wade chest-deep through rising waters. Trees toppled under the weight of wind and rain, their massive trunks blocking paths and forcing long detours through unknown terrain. Despite the danger, you found small moments of beauty. Fireflies danced in the humid night air. The calls of nightbirds echoed gently beneath the moonlit canopy. In these quiet moments, the forest felt alive, not as a prison, but as a companion in your long fight. Weapons shipments from Manila occasionally reached the camps. Small crates, smuggled through bribed dockworkers or sympathetic merchants. Rusty revolvers, limited ammunition, even old Spanish rifles stolen from previous battle. Each weapon was precious, each bullet accounted for. You trained constantly. Elder fighters demonstrated guerrilla tactics, how to set traps, how to disappear into thick bamboo in seconds, how to create false trails to confuse pursuing soldiers. Discipline was strict. Silence was survival. There were also rumors, whispers of foreign aid that might come from sympathetic nations. But for now, it was only you, your brothers, and the land itself standing against the empire. The weight of revolution rested on tired, hungry shoulders. You dreamed of victory, but you also prepared for martyrdom. The names of those who had already fallen echoed like prayers in your mind. Gumboza, Jose Rasol, your own fallen brothers, whose bodies now fed the earth beneath your feet. In the distance, church bells often rang from nearby towns. Their soft echoes reached your ears even in the heart of the jungle. They served as reminders of home, of faith, of the very society you were trying to free. Sometimes they brought comfort, other times they stoked your quiet rage. Camps relocated often, following secret signals. A scarf tied to a specific branch. 3 knocks on a hollow tree. The flutter of a white cloth tied to a stone outcrop. These simple signs kept your scattered forces connected, even across great distances. Illness and injury wore many down, but spirits remained unbroken. Around the campfires, stories were shared, tales of love, family, and the future republic you all dreamed of. Laughter, though rare, still found its way through the canopy. Older Katipuneros spoke of the prophecies of Colonial of the Philippines, finally rising free. Some swore they would not live to see it, but that their children surely would. This hope became their legacy, even in the face of certain danger. As weeks turned into months, seasons shifted. The forest changed color and scent. Dry winds carried dust from distant fields. New enemies arrived. Not only Spanish soldiers, but native collaborators paid to hunt your brothers for profit. You hardened yourself. You trusted only a few. You moved like a shadow and listened like a hunter. The Katipunero became not just a fighter, but a ghost in the land that raised him. And yet, through it all, you remembered why you fought. The vision of a Philippines where your children could walk freely through the streets without fear, where no friar held a whip, and no soldier bled the people dry. A country that belonged to Filipinos. Each sunrise reminded you that the revolution was not simply a war, it was a promise. One you carried in every step, every cut of your blade, and every silent prayer beneath the wide Philippine sky. The nights grew longer, or at least they felt that way. As the revolution dragged on, your senses sharpened even further. The faintest crack of a twig in the distance would set your hand instinctively to your bolo. Every unfamiliar sound was a possible threat. Each day began with silent prayers. You prayed not only for survival but for guidance, for strength, for the safety of those waiting for you back home. You could almost hear your mother's whispered Hail Marys as you stood beneath the trees, ready to march. Your companions had become your second family. The faces around the small fires grew familiar. The quiet young man from Biography, who spoke rarely but fought fiercely the older brother from Cubby, who carried a scar across his cheek, the farmer who still whispered to his absent wife every evening before sleeping. You all carried the same quiet desperation, and yet you laughed sometimes. The laughter was small, brief, but real. Small moments stolen from the grimness of your reality, shared over boiled root crops or crude stories about life before the rebellion. On some rare nights, you sang simple folk songs, songs of the land and of the people, carried softly under the moonlight. The melodies were a reminder that you were fighting for more than victory. You were fighting to preserve the soul of your people. But as the months turned into years, the Spanish response hardened. More troops arrived from Madrid. Officers once stationed in Cuba or Africa now led the suppression effort. Their ruthlessness was sharpened by their fear of the growing rebellion. Entire villages were burned on suspicion of harboring Catapuneros. Rice fields were trampled under the boots of soldiers. Civilians were rounded up and questioned brutally. Some were never seen again. The Guardia Civil grew more aggressive. Patrols now scoured the hills relentlessly, armed with newer rifles, maps, and informants who betrayed their neighbors for silver coins or protection. You learned to adapt. Camps were moved more frequently, sometimes every few days. Supplies were buried in hidden caches beneath tree roots or concealed inside hollow bamboo trunks, waiting for future retrieval. New tactics were whispered among your ranks. Traps laid across narrow jungle paths, hidden pits, sharpened stakes, waiting beneath layers of leaves. The forest became both your sanctuary and your weapon. Bonifacio's orders continued to reach you sporadically, passed hand to hand through trusted couriers who risked everything with each journey. Messages arrived written in invisible ink, or hidden inside hollowed-out candles, or disguised as ordinary letters. The code words changed regularly. What once was Kalayan now became Liwana. The secret hand signals became more complex. Even your own comrades sometimes needed days to confirm identities. Among you, legends of bravery began to circulate. Stories of Catapuneros who held off entire platoons, who slipped through ambushes unseen, who survived torture without betraying their brothers. These tales offered strength during the darkest days, but there were also stories of betrayal. Entire units wiped out after one man broke under torture. Camps discovered because of careless words spoken in nearby markets. Faces you had seen around the fires simply vanished, their fates whispered but never confirmed. Despite everything, the resolve of the Brotherhood held strong, even as wounds festered, as hunger gnawed bellies, as comrades were buried beneath shallow graves. You all held the same vision, a Philippines that belonged to Filipino. The revolution was no longer just a movement, it had become your entire existence. The faces of your family blurred with the faces of your comrades. The boundaries between personal sacrifice and national duty. The jungle shaped your body into something leaner, harder. Hunger became familiar, like an old friend that accompanied you on every march. Your skin darkened under the relentless sun. Your eyes constantly scanned the horizon, calculating risk with every movement. Yet, amid the hardship, you found moments of strange peace. The steady hum of cicadas at night, the cool breeze that sometimes swept through the dense undergrowth, the way moonlight glistened on wet leaves after a rainstorm. You learned to read the forest as one reads a book. The broken branches, the shifted stones, the distant cries of animals, all offered clues about who had passed through before you. The jungle spoke, and you had learned to listen. And as you listened, you often thought of your children, of a future where they would attend schools that taught Filipino history, where they would no longer bow to friars, where their labor would feed only their own families. You clung to that vision tightly. It gave meaning to every blistered footstep, to every empty stomach, to every brother lost along the way. It was your North Star beneath a Philippine sky. The seasons changed once more. The rains returned, heavier than before. Rivers swelled, forcing dangerous crossings. Diseases spread faster in the wet, cramped camps. You've buried more comrades as fevers claimed those too weak to fight the sickness. Still, you pushed forward. The ranks of the Katipunan grew thinner. but they grew stronger in spirit. Each man who remained had seen too much, lost too much, to ever surrender. The Spaniards increased their rewards for captured catapult. Posters were nailed to tree trunks and church doors, offering gold for your capture, or death. But the communities around you, many just as desperate, still offered quiet support. Food appeared in secret drops. Messages were passed through young children pretending to play in the street. The revolution had become not just the work of fighters, but of an entire people whispering beneath the surface of Spanish rule. And as news spread of uprisings in other provinces, in Cavite, in Batangas, in Laguna, you felt the pulse of something greater. The revolution was no longer isolated. It was spreading like fire across the archipelago. But victory remained far. The Spanish continued their brutal crackdowns. Leaders were captured, interrogated, executed, and yet, with every death, new names stepped forward, carrying the banner of Colonial higher. One evening, as you sat beneath the massive belet tree that marked your camp's newest hiding place, you felt the weight of everything you had endured. The losses, the victories, the sacrifices, the endless nights of hiding, running, fighting. You knew the risks had never been higher. The end was not yet in sight. And still, as you looked up at the stars glittering through the branches, you whispered the same silent vow you had carried since your first oath. Para saya, inang bayan. The humid streets of Tondo were always alive with movement. Narrow alleys twisted like veins between rows of Nepa huts and weathered stone houses. Merchants called out their prices under the harsh sun. The scent of fresh fish from the nearby market mixed with the acrid smoke from open fires. This was the world where Andres Bonifacio first opened his Isa world of noise, struggle, and poverty. He was born into hardship in 1863. His family, like most Indios in the colony, carried the weight of Spanish oppression daily. His father, Santiago, worked as a tailor. His mother, Catalina, stitched embroidery for extra income. Their earnings barely covered their simple meals of rice, dried fish, and boiled vegetables. But even this fragile stability did not last. One by one, Bonifacio's parents died of illness, leaving Andres orphaned, while still in his early teens. With younger siblings to feed, the young boy was forced to grow up quickly. The weight of responsibility settled on his thin shoulders long before he was ready. He found work wherever he could. By day, he sold walking canes and fans along the streets. By night, he stitched paper masks that would later be sold during town. His hands became rough, his legs weary from hours of walking under Manila's relentless heat. Yet inside him burned a hunger that went beyond filling empty stomachs. While others sought rest at day's end, Bonifacio devoured books. He read borrowed copies of The Lives of the Presidents of the United States and accounts of the French and American revolutions. He taught himself Spanish and learned to read difficult texts. His mind, though untrained by any university, sharpened through quiet determination. It was in those pages that the seeds of revolution were planted. He read of peoples rising against injustice, of simple men challenging tyrants, of oppressed nations casting off foreign rulers. These stories whispered to him late into the night, as the candles burned low. Manila at the time was divided sharply between the privileged and the poor. The Spaniards, Friars, and Spanish Mestizos lived in grand stone houses with tiled floors and decorative gardens. Meanwhile, Filipinos like Bonifacio survived in shanties, subjected to heavy taxes and daily The Guardia civil harassed locals freely, extorting bribes and punishing minor offenses with cruel beatings. The Friars, wielding both religious and political power, controlled vast lands and dictated moral authority. They owned haciendas worked by tenant farmers who labored endlessly, often sinking deeper into debt year after year. The injustices were layered, deeply embedded into every corner of colonial life. But discontent was not confined to the poor. Among the educated class, or ilustrados, whispers of reform began to spread. These men, often from wealthy families, studied abroad and returned with dangerous ideas of nationalism, equality, and constitutional government. José Rizal, the most prominent of these reformers, published his novel Noli Me Tangere in 1887. It unveiled the abuses committed by friars and colonial officials, exposing the painful realities behind the smiling facade of Spanish rule. His words ignited quiet fury across the archipelago. When Rizal returned to Manila in 1892, Bonifacio was among those who eagerly attended his meetings. The reformers formed La Liga Filipina, a peaceful movement seeking legal reforms and equality under Spanish rule. For a moment, it seemed possible that change might come through dialogue, but the Spaniards reacted quickly. Within days, Rizal was arrested and exiled to Dapitan. The Liga dissolved under pressure. Hope for peaceful reform shattered, leaving men like Bonifacio at a crossroads. It was here that Bonifacio took a different path. If the Spaniards would not listen to petitions, then perhaps they would answer to steel. He and his closest Alistiadoro Plata, Ladislao Diwa, and others formed the Kagalango Langgang, Katipunan, NG, Mga Anak NG. Unlike the Liga, the Katipunan did not seek compromise. It prepared for open revolution. Meetings were held in secret, often in basements, forests, or remote rice fields. Members swore loyalty in blood, pricking their fingers and signing oaths beneath flickering candlelight. Passwords, hand signals, and codes were developed to protect identities. The recruitment process was cautious. Only trusted individuals were invited, often vouched for by existing members. Entire families participated in secrecy, hiding documents in jars buried beneath floorboards or stitched into clothing linings. The movement grew rapidly. Ordinary farmers, artisans, laborers, clerks, and teachers joined. Unlike the Liga, which had been dominated by the educated class, the Katipunan belonged to the mass. It was fueled by the frustration of those who lived daily under the Spaniards' boots. Bonifacio, though lacking formal education, possessed leadership that inspired loyalty. His voice was calm but firm, his words simple but powerful. He spoke the language of the common man. Not lofty rhetoric, but raw truths. As the months passed, secret printing presses churned out pamphlets spreading the Katipunan's message. Propaganda was quietly circulated, encouraging Filipinos to rise and reclaim their homeland. Women like Gregoria de Jesus, Bonifacio's wife, played crucial roles as couriers and record keepers, preserving sensitive documents at great personal risk. The movement's existence remained hidden for several years. Even as its membership swelled, weapons were collected, bolos, spears, and stolen firearms, though they remained vastly outmatched by Spanish armaments. By 1896, the Katipunan was no longer a small group of idealists, but a widespread underground movement. The dream of Colonial freedom was closer than ever before, yet so fragile that one careless word could destroy it all. The danger intensified. Spanish spies prowled Manila, offering rewards for informants. Some members broke under interrogation, revealing secret meeting places. Raids were conducted. Arrests followed. The walls began to close in. Bonifacio understood the risk, but he also knew there was no longer any room for retreat. The time for revolution was fast approaching. The storm that had quietly brewed beneath Spanish Manila for decades was now ready to break. As August dawned, the first cracks appeared that would unleash the coming flood and forever change the life of Supremo Bonifacio. The tension in Manila during 1896 was no longer just a quiet murmur, it was a storm gathering over the island. Spanish authorities had begun to suspect that an organized resistance was growing underneath their fragile colonial order. The Guardia Civil patrolled with sharper eyes. The Friars whispered in government halls. Informants lurked in every market, every town square, every church confessional. The air was thick with paranoia, for Bonifacio each day carried increasing danger. The Katipunan had expanded quickly, swelling with members across Manila, Bulacan, Cavite, Batangas, Laguna, and beyond. Entire barrios whispered of freedom. Peasants joined, artisans joined, even some provincial elites quietly pledged support. Yet with growth came exposure. The risk of discovery loomed larger than ever. Despite the looming threat, the Katipunan's meetings grew bolder. Bonifacio continued his travels, slipping quietly from town to town, meeting with local cells, organizing new councils called Sangguniang. These local Katipunan chapters trained recruits, gathered weapons, and spread revolutionary propaganda. The movement now numbered in the thousands. At the heart of Katipunan activity was the printing press secretly hidden in Manila. Pamphlets circulated calling for liberty from the Spanish crown. Though only a few issues were printed, spread like wildfire. It presented the dream of an independent Philippines, written in Tagalog for the first time to reach even the uneducated mass. Each copy passed from hand to hand, read in candlelit gatherings and memorized like scripture. Gregoria de Jesus, Bonifacio's wife and the Lakambini of the Katipunan, worked tirelessly behind the scenes. She protected documents, maintained records, and risked her life daily to safeguard the secrets of the Brotherhood. Many women, too, became vital couriers, hiding coded messages in baskets of produce or sewn into clothing linings. By mid-1896, Bonifacio knew war was no longer a question of if, but when. Preparations intensified. Bamboo spears were sharpened, bolos were readied, crude firearms and limited ammunition were gathered from sympathetic soldiers or purchased at great cost from black markets. Yet the Spaniards remained largely unaware of the full scale of the conspiracy until one betrayal changed everything. A member named Teodoro Patino, frightened after an argument, confessed the Katipunan's existence to a priest in Tondo. The priest, in turn, alerted the authorities. In late August, police raided printing houses and captured Katipunan records. Names, documents, and membership lists fell into Spanish hands. Panic spread through Manila like wildfire. Arrests were made swiftly. Torture chambers filled with suspected Katipuneros. Families were threatened. Some members broke under interrogation, revealing meeting places and safe houses. Fear gripped the organization. Bonifacio quickly summoned an emergency meeting at Pugadloin, a secluded clearing outside Manila. Leaders, members, and supporters gathered in haste. The meeting carried an electric tension, as the fate of the revolution now hung by a thread. At the center stood Bonifacio, his voice steady but fierce. He addressed the crowd. Mga kapatid, this is no longer the time for hesitation. Our secrets are uncovered. Our brothers are imprisoned. We must rise, or we will all fall, one by one. If we die, let it be fighting for our freedom. He pulled his own cedula, the hated tax certificate that symbolized every Filipino's submission to Spanish rule, and tore it into shreds. One by one, the crowd followed. Cedulas were ripped and thrown into the air like falling leaves. The collective act became forever immortalized as the cry of Pugadloin. From that moment forward, the Philippines was at war. In the days that followed, armed clashes erupted across the province. In Caloocan, hundreds of Katipuneros launched daring attacks against Spanish outposts. In Bulacan and Laguna, small skirmishes broke out, as local Katipunan chapters answered Bonifacio's call. But the revolutionaries were poorly equipped. Many fighters wore only camisa chinos and wielded bullets. Facing professional Spanish soldiers armed with Mauser rifles, artillery, and cavalry support, Spanish reinforcements arrived swiftly from Manila, reclaiming outposts and executing captured rebels. Despite the early setbacks, Bonifacio refused to retreat. He moved constantly, organizing fresh offensives, coordinating with provincial leaders, and rallying morale among his exhausted, undersupplied fighters. He reminded his men that they did not fight for glory, but for future generations of Filipinos who would one day live free. Meanwhile, as Bonifacio struggled on the front lines, a new challenge emerged, one far more dangerous than any Spanish regiment. In Cavite, the Katipunan had gained significant strength, particularly in the wealthy and well-armed provinces Magdalo and Magdiwang factions. Both were led by influential families: Ambrosio Rianzares Batista and Baldomero Aguinaldo for the Magdalo, and Mariano Alvarez for the While both factions claimed loyalty to the Katipunan's cause, they disagreed on leadership, tactics, and vision. The Magdalo, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, were increasingly confident in their own military successes and resources. They began to question Bonifacio's authority. Tensions simmered as letters flew back and forth. Some accused Bonifacio of being uneducated and militarily inexperienced. Others feared centralizing leadership under Cavite's elite would alienate the common people. Bonifacio, aware of these growing divisions, traveled personally to Cavite to ease tensions and unify the movement. But he arrived in a political firestorm. The Magdalo faction viewed him with suspicion, seeing an outsider threatening their growing power. Secret meetings were held behind closed doors. Strategies were whispered between the powerful families who believed the revolution needed more proper leadership. The fractures within the Katipunan were growing wider by the day, even as Spanish troops advanced relentlessly. And as the conflict within Cavite's leadership deepened, Bonifacio would soon find himself trapped not by foreign colonizers, but by his own brothers in the Teros Convention. By early 1897, the revolution was entering a dangerous phase, not simply because of Spanish forces, but because the revolution itself was splintering from within. What began as a united cry for freedom was now being divided by ambition, mistrust, and regional pride. In Cavite, two powerful factions of the Katipunan controlled different territories: the Magdalwang under Mariano Alvarez, and the Magdalo led by Baldomero Aguinaldo. While both professed loyalty to the revolution, their rivalry simmered quietly beneath the surface. The Magdalwang recognized Bonifacio's authority as the supreme leader of the Katip. The Magdalo, however, increasingly saw themselves as the true leaders of the revolution due to their military successes. Cavite had become the stronghold of the rebellion, and many Magdalo leaders viewed Bonifacio, who was not Cavitello, as lacking the military discipline and vision needed to win the war. Spanish forces, though bloodied, were regrouping. Reinforcements from Spain arrived, pushing back several revolutionary fronts. In Manila, the Spanish governor-general plotted to divide and destroy the movement entirely. As the revolution fought battles against the colonial forces, an invisible war of politics, pride, and power was growing deadlier. Bonifacio, aware of these tensions, was invited to Cavite in late 1896. He accepted, hoping to resolve the internal disputes and unify the movement under one central command. His arrival was met with a mixture of respect and quiet resistance. Some Magdala leaders openly questioned his authority. They saw Bonifacio not as the Supremo, but as a threat to their growing influence. In March 1897, in an attempt to finally settle the leadership dispute, the factions agreed to hold an election in Teros. The idea was simple on paper: elect a single revolutionary government that would lead the revolution forward. The Teros Convention was held inside a simple Hulla Spanish colonial house converted into a meeting place. Rough wooden benches were packed with officers, soldiers, and prominent leaders. The air inside was heavy, not only with humidity but with unspoken tension. Bonifacio, as presiding officer, opened the assembly with the hope that unity could finally be restored. But the proceedings quickly turned political. As the voting began, the Magdalo faction displayed its dominance. Many Magdawang votes were drowned out by Magdalo supporters. When the election concluded, Emilio Aguinaldo, who was absent, still on the battlefield, was elected president. Mariano was named vice president. Bonifacio the Suprema was offered the role of director of the Interior, a post far beneath his previous authority. Before Bonifacio could fully process this, Daniel Tiranaya, Magdala supporter, stood up and loudly questioned his qualification for the position. He sneered that Bonifacio, lacking a lawyer's diploma, was unfit for the post and should be replaced by a more educated man. The insult humiliated Bonifacio in front of the assembly. His face stiffened, his voice low but filled with anger. The Supremo declared the results null and void, accusing the gathering of corruption and disrespect. I, as Supreme President of this Assembly and of the Katipunan, declared this Assembly dissolved. The unity that Bonifacio had tried to build shattered instantly. The factions walked away more divided than ever before. In the days following Tejos, the situation escalated. Bonifacio, feeling betrayed and threatened, established his own government, issuing documents that reaffirmed his authority. His small force, loyal and desperate, withdrew into the mountains of Inda. Meanwhile, Aguinaldo's faction, now officially recognized as the revolutionary government, saw Bonifacio's refusal to recognize Tejaros as a dangerous act of rebellion. Quiet orders were issued. Armed men were dispatched to confront the In late April 1897, Bonifacio and his brother Procopio were ambushed by Aguinaldo's forces. In the skirmish, Bonifacio was wounded by a gunshot to his arm and a deep wound to his neck from a balo. Despite the injuries, they were captured alive and brought before Aguinaldo's military tribunal. Thus began one of the most painful and controversial chapters of the revolution, the trial of the man who had started it all. Trial, execution, and aftermath. Bonifacio was brought to Cavite, quiet town, where the trial would be conducted under Aguinaldo's revolutionary government. It was a dark irony that Bonifacio, the founder of the revolution, would now stand accused by his own countrymen. The charges against him were grave: treason, sedition, and attempting to overthrow the newly established revolutionary government. The tribunal, composed of Aguinaldo's officers, presented accusations that Bonifacio plotted to divide the revolution, conspired with the Spanish, and refused to recognize legitimate authority. But the evidence was thin, the witnesses questionable. Some testimonies were hearsay, others were forced under duress. No Spanish collaboration was ever proven. Bonifacio, weak from his wounds, stood before his accusers with quiet dignity. His brother Procopio, equally powerless, watched helplessly. The trial was less about justice and more about eliminating a political threat. In the revolutionary court, where loyalty to Aguinaldo often dictated outcomes, the verdict was a foregone conclusion. Bonifacio and Procopio were sentenced to death. For a brief moment, Aguinaldo hesitated. Accounts suggest he was troubled by the decision, unsure if executing Bonifacio was justified. Some advisors urged clemency, warning that the execution of the revolution's founder could fracture the movement permanently. But others, particularly from the Magdalo faction, insisted that Bonifacio's survival posed an ongoing threat to the unity of the government. Ultimately, the execution order was signed. On May 10, 1897, in the remote foothills of Mount Nag, Bonifacio and his brother were led by armed men deep into the forest. The air was damp, the ground soft beneath their feet. No formal ceremony marked their final moments. Accounts vary on whether Bonifacio was even able to walk or had to be carried. Some say he begged for mercy, others say he remained silent. In the quiet isolation of the forest, they were executed shot or hacked with bolos, their bodies left unceremoniously in shallow graves. Andres Bonifacio, the man who had sparked the Philippine Revolution, died not at the hands of Spanish executioners, but by order of his own compatriots. News of Bonifacio's death was kept quiet at first. Many revolutionaries only learned of it weeks or months later. The tragedy casts a shadow over the revolution that would haunt its leaders for generations. Despite the turmoil, Aguinaldo's government continued the war against the Spanish. Battles raged across Luzon, even as famine, disease, and Spanish counterattacks threatened to crush the revolution completely. The Spanish, sensing Aguinaldo's growing desperation, offered negotiations. In late 1897, the Pact of Biak-na-Bato was signed. Aguinaldo agreed to temporary exile in exchange for monetary compensation and a fragile truce. For a brief time, the revolution slowed, but Bonifacio's death left an unhealed wound in the heart of the Filipino people. The revolution was far from over. Within a few short months, the Spanish-American War would explode across the Pacific, and the Philippines would be drawn into a new conflict with new foreign masters. the struggle for true independence was far from finished. Bonifacio's legacy, however, would only grow with time. While others fought on battlefields and sat in negotiations, Bonifacio remained the people's symbol, a man who had nothing, but dared to fight everything. The revolution staggers on. After Bonifacio's death, the execution of André Bonifacio left a permanent scar on the revolution. His death was not merely the fall of a man, but the fall of an idea, the dream, that ordinary Filipinos, united by their shared suffering, could take ownership of their own destiny. Yet the war pressed on. After Bonifacio's death in May 1897, the conflict between Aguinaldo's revolutionary government and the Spanish forces intensified. Aguinaldo, but uniting the fragmented factions was far from simple. Many Katipuneros loyal to Bonifacio grieved in silence or drifted into disillusionment. Some small units broke away entirely, refusing to recognize Aguinaldo's leadership. Others chose to continue fighting, their hatred of the Spanish outweighing internal rivalries. The spirit of rebellion was still alive, but the unity was fractured. Spanish forces continued their brutal campaign. Entire towns were burned. Suspected rebels were rounded up and executed publicly to serve as warnings. Fields were torched to prevent supplies from reaching the revolutionaries hiding in the hills. In Cavite, Aguinaldo found himself increasingly cornered. Spanish reinforcements under Governor General Primo de Rivera were determined to crush the uprising once and for all. The rebels retreated further into the mountains, setting up makeshift camps in the remote areas of Biak Naboto and Bulacan. Life in Biak Naboto was harsh. The revolutionaries lived in caves and crude shelters. Disease spread easily in the cramped quarters. Food was scarce. Yet even here Aguinaldo attempted to maintain the image of a functioning government, complete with officers, councils, and plans for future independence. But the revolution was faltering. Morale was low, supplies were dwindling, and victories were rare. Recognizing the growing hopelessness of their situation, Aguinaldo opened secret negotiations with the Spanish in late 1897. The Spanish offered a deal. Aguinaldo and his key officers would be exiled to Hong Kong in exchange for a substantial sum of money for 100,000 pesos and promises of reforms in the Philippines. Known as the Pact of Biak Naboto, the agreement was controversial, even among Aguinaldo's closest advisors. Some viewed it as a necessary pause, a chance to regroup. Others saw it as a betrayal of the revolution's very purpose. After months of negotiation, Aguinaldo agreed. In December 1897, he and several revolutionary leaders boarded ships bound for Hong Kong, leaving behind the weary fighters who had bled for the cause. In exile, Aguinaldo intended to use the funds to purchase arms and ammunition for a future resurgence, yet his departure left the revolution in a dangerous vacuum. Small rebel bands continued to fight, but without centralized leadership. Many were hunted down by Spanish forces. Entire regions were pacified once more under Spanish rule. The revolution, it seemed, had died with Bonifacio after all. But fate had other plans. A new storm was about to arrive, not from Spain, but from across the Pacific Ocean. The Philippines was about to become entangled in a far greater conflict that would reshape its future entirely. The Americans arrive. Revolution reignited. In April 8, the world shifted in ways that would once again drag the Philippines into the whirlwind of foreign powers. The Spanish-American War broke out, a conflict that had little to do with the islands themselves, yet would change the course of Filipino history forever. For years, Filipinos had fought and died for freedom from Spain. But now, a new imperial power loomed on the horizon. The United States declared war on Spain following the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. What began as a conflict over Cuba expanded rapidly across Spain's remaining colonial possessions. And so, halfway across the world, Manila suddenly became a target of American strategy. Commodore George Dewey, commanding the U.S. Asiatic Squadron stationed in Hong Kong, was ordered to sail to Manila Bay. In the early morning hours of May 1, 1898, under the cover of darkness, Dewey's fleet slipped past Spanish defenses. As the sun rose, American warships opened fire on the Spanish Pacific Squadron. The battle was brutal, but swift. By noon, the Spanish fleet was destroyed, and Manila Bay belonged to the Americans. News of the American victory spread like wildfire, not only in the West but across the Philippines. For Aguinaldo, then still in exile in Hong Kong following the Pact of Biagnabato, this was an unexpected opening. American officials, eager to gain local allies, reached out to him. Meetings were held in secret. Promises were made, promises of cooperation, of mutual goals, of Filipino independence. Buoyed by these assurances, Aguinaldo prepared to return to the Philippines. On May 19, 1898, he landed in Cavite to an ecstatic reception. The revolution, dormant and demoralized for months, suddenly flared back to life. For Mayor Katipuneto's peasants and local leaders flocked once again to Aguinaldo's side. With Spain's forces weakened and isolated, victory seemed within reach. Within weeks, Filipino forces, many of them veterans of earlier battles, surrounded Manila. Town after town declared independence from Spanish rule. Aguinaldo re-established his revolutionary government with renewed authority, this time presenting it not as a secret brotherhood, but as a formal republic poised to govern a free nation. On June 12, 1898, in Cavite, Aguinaldo stood before his people and declared Philippine independence. A new flag was raised, sewn by Filipino women in exile land. The national anthem was played for the first time. In that moment, hope filled the air. Generations of struggle and bloodshed seemed to have finally achieved their goal, but the dream was fragile. Though Filipino forces controlled most of the archipelago, Manila itself remained under the control of Spanish troops, who had negotiated a secret truce with the Americans. Unknown to Aguinaldo and his government, Spain was negotiating directly with the United States, not with Filipinos, about the final fate of the islands. In December 1898, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Spain formally ceded the Philippines, along with Guam and Puerto Rico, to the United States for $20 million. Filipino representatives were not invited to the talks. They had no voice. Their revolution was erased from the negotiating table as if it had never existed. By early 1899, American soldiers began to arrive in greater numbers, occupying not only Manila but spreading throughout strategic points across Luzon. Tensions simmered as Filipino and American troops eyed one another suspiciously across invisible lines of control. Aguinaldo's government, still believing in American promises of eventual independence, tried to negotiate, but the Americans, now acting as colonial administrators, dismissed the revolutionary government as illegitimate. Filipino appeals for recognition were ignored. The situation reached a breaking point on February 4, 1899. That night, American sentries stationed near the San Juan Bridge fired on a group of Filipino soldiers. The shots, whether intentional or accidental, ignited a chain reaction. Within hours, full-scale fighting erupted across Manila. The Philippine-American War had begun. The new conflict was unlike the revolution against Spain. The American military, equipped with modern weaponry, superior training, and vast resources, pushed Filipino forces back relentlessly. Entire towns were captured in days. Filipino armies, though brave and determined, struggled to match the Americans in open battle. Aguinaldo shifted tactics, retreating into the mountains and adopting guerrilla warfare. Filipino fighters ambushed American patrols, sabotaged supply lines, and melted back into the dense jungles. Civilians often bore the brunt of the conflict. Many, suspected of aiding guerrillas, were imprisoned, tortured, or killed. Entire communities were forcibly relocated into reconcentration camps, where hunger and disease ran rampant. The brutality shocked many back in the United States, where a growing but on the ground in the Philippines, the war ground on mercilessly. In 1901, Aguinaldo himself was captured by American forces in Palanas. His arrests marked the symbolic collapse of the organized resistance. Though smaller guerrilla groups continued to fight for several years, The dream of independence was slipping once again into the hands of foreign powers. By 1902, the United States formally declared the war over. The Philippines was now an American colony. Yet even in defeat, the legacy of Bonifacio and the countless nameless Katipuneros who had fought and died lived on. The revolution had planted a seed that could not be fully extinguished. Filipino nationalism continued to simmer quietly beneath the surface of American rule. New generations of leaders would eventually emerge, educators who carried the spirit of 1896 forward into the 20th century. The revolution was not truly dead. It had only changed its shape. For while foreign flags might still wave over the archipelago, the Filipino soul had already broken free. The lost secrets of the Katipunan and the hidden mysteries of the revolution, the secret brotherhood, how the Katipunan operated in the shadows. In the crowded streets of late 19th century Manila, where Spanish authorities patrolled and friars held immense power, a quiet revolution was already brewing hidden from sight, whispered only among those who dared to dream of freedom. This was not a conventional rebellion waged openly with armies, but a silent, calculated network of ordinary men and women bound together by oaths of secrecy. They called themselves the Katip. You would not have seen them during the day. In the light, they were farmers, teachers, printers, clerks, barbers, but at night, behind shuttered windows and locked doors, they gathered in dimly lit rooms, swearing blood oaths and planning the downfall of their colonial oppressors. Every sound, every knock at the door, every flicker of candlelight carried the weight of life or death. If you were to join the Katipunan, the first thing you'd encounter would not be a sword or a rifle but a test. Recruits were carefully screened through an elaborate vetting process. Suspicion was the currency of survival. Informants were everywhere. A single slip could lead to the gallows or the garret. Candidates were sponsored by trusted members and brought before the secret tribunal. You'd be asked questions about your background, beliefs, loyalty to the cause, and whether you were prepared to face death if necessary. If accepted, you'd be led into a candlelit chamber for the initiation, one of the most mysterious and sacred rituals of the Kat. Inside, the walls were often draped in black cloth, adorned with skulls and crossbones. At the center stood an altar displaying the triangle of duty, love of God, country, and family. You would be blindfolded, led around the room while oaths were recited. Finally, a small cut would be made on your arm, and with your own blood, you would sign your name into the Libro ng Katip. The use of blood wasn't symbolic, it was binding. It signified that your life now belonged to the revolution. Breaking your oath meant certain death, not just for you, but potentially for your entire family. The Katipunan understood that secrecy was its greatest weapon. They developed a coded language of symbols, signs, and passwords. Members addressed each other as Kapatid, and leaders were known as Pangulo or They adopted the ciphered alphabet known as Katipunan Code, or Cartilioso, that even written messages could not be easily understood by outsiders. The Katipunan even devised their own hand signals and tattoos. A simple gesture tap on the chest, a certain way of folding the arms could reveal whether a stranger was a fellow member. These small signals allowed members to identify each other across towns and provinces, building a vast underground network that stretched from Tando to Cavite, from Bulacan to Laguna. Printing presses hidden in basements churned out secret pamphlets calling for independence. Couriers traveled on foot or by horse across dangerous countryside routes, delivering encoded messages wrapped inside loaves of bread or sewn into clothing. Women known as Katipuneros played critical roles as messengers, fundraisers, and even spies, often underestimated by the Spanish authorities. It was an operation of extraordinary discipline and bravery. Every member understood the stakes. Spanish authorities, assisted by Filipino collaborators known as Guardia, offered generous rewards for information about Katipunan activities. Many suspected revolutionaries were arrested, tortured, and executed. Their bodies hung in public squares as grim warnings. Still, the Brotherhood persisted. As membership swelled from dozens to thousands, it became increasingly difficult to maintain absolute secrecy. By 1896, the Spanish crackdown intensified. Suspicion loomed like a constant shadow over Manila. Informants embedded themselves into communities. Arrests multiplied. The circle was tightening. And yet, despite the looming danger, the Katipunan held its ground, waiting, organizing, preparing for the moment when secrecy would no longer suffice, when swords would replace whispered. The mystery of how such a widespread underground movement survived for years beneath the very noses of colonial authorities remains one of the most remarkable chapters in revolutionary history, a testament to discipline, trust, and the desperate courage of the oppressed. The missing relics of the Katipunan, lost artifacts and forgotten secrets even after the revolution. Long after the public executions, battles, and shifting colonial rulers, much of the physical world of the Katipunan remained shrouded in mystery. Countless documents, relics, and secret artifacts disappeared into the cracks of history, many still missing today, buried in forgotten hideouts, caves, or private collections, their stories left incomplete. Among the most mysterious of these lost relics is the original Libro ng Katipunan, the master list, containing the names of every sworn member. In its pages were the blood-signed oaths of the earliest revolutionaries, marking the very foundation of the Brotherhood. The book was believed to have been fiercely guarded, moved from safe house to safe house, as Spanish raids grew frequent. After the capture of several key leaders, the book vanished entirely. To this day, no confirmed copy has ever reached. Historians have speculated that surviving members may have hidden the book permanently to protect their families from future retribution. Others believe that Spanish or American authorities confiscated and destroyed it to erase evidence of the revolution's reach. Its location remains one of the most sought-after mysteries among Filipino scholars and treasure hunters alike. Beyond documents, there were also physical symbols of the Brotherhood, ritual daggers used during initiations, some reportedly made of ivory or silver, have rarely been found intact. These blades, often engraved with secret markings, represented the solemn pact between the Katipunero and the revolution. Only a handful survive in private collections and museums, their authenticity still debated. Rumors persist of hidden Katipunan vaults, buried beneath old homes, or within caves, in the Sierra Madre Mountains. These caches were said to hold not only weapons and funds but personal letters, maps, and even early blueprints of battle strategies, evidence that could shed light on the full organizational genius of the Kati. One of the most tantalizing lost artifacts is the so-called Katipunan flag of Tando, the earliest battle standard, personally commissioned by Andres Bon. Unlike the more famous Sun and Stars flag flown during the Declaration of Independence, this early flag allegedly bore a blood-red field with a bold white KKK and a mystical sun symbol at its center. Multiple versions existed, but Bonifacio's personal flag has never been found. Eyewitness accounts from Spanish raids describe how entire caches of Katipunan material were hastily burned or smuggled away just before raids. Some chests were allegedly sunk into rivers, others walled into secret compartments within homes. Generations later, these locations remain unverified rumors, fueling small communities of modern-day treasure hunters still searching for the hidden bounty of the revolution. Even the final resting places of some key Katipunan leaders remain uncertain. While Bonifacio's unmarked grave was eventually identified with some controversy, others, like obscure provincial leaders and Katipuneros, were buried in anonymity, their stories untold. The passage of time has only deepened the mystery. Natural disasters, urban development, and deliberate destruction have erased many physical traces of the revolution. Yet each whispered rumor of a lost journal, an unearthed sword, or a sealed chest buried beneath old haciendas keeps the legend alive. In many ways, the missing artifacts of the Katipunan have become symbols of something larger, a reminder that history itself can be fragile, easily distorted or forgotten, unless fiercely protected. For modern Filipinos, the search for these lost relics is not just about recovering objects, it is about reclaiming a narrative stolen by centuries of foreign rule. And somewhere, perhaps in a hidden cave, behind an ancient wall, or buried beneath layers of Manila's concrete streets. The last secrets of the Katipunan may still be waiting to be found.
The hidden Katipunan rituals and forgotten symbols. While the political goals of the Katipunan were known to overthrow Spanish rule and secure Philippine independent star, inner spiritual world of the Brotherhood remains far more mysterious. Beneath the flag, rifles, and battle cries lay an entire system of rituals, symbols, and beliefs that stitched the Katipunan into something much more than a rebel army. It was a secret society with its own sacred rites. If you were a newly initiated Katipunero, your journey wouldn't end with your blood signature. Instead, you would be introduced to the spiritual and symbolic core of the Brotherhood, a carefully crafted blend of Filipino cultural traditions, indigenous animism, Catholic influences, and Masonic principles adopted from the Freemasons, which many early leaders secretly belonged to. In darkened rooms lit only by flickering candles, symbols were everywhere. The Katipunan triangle was not a random design. It represented the Holy Trinity of God, country, and family. Inside the triangle were often inscribed the three letters KKK, Kagalangalongin Katipunan NG, Mganakinji Bayon. Every element carried deep significance, grounding members in their sworn duty. Even the passwords used during meetings changed regularly, drawn from secret phrases or coded numbers. The Katipunan alphabet itself, known as the Babayin code, was sometimes combined with Roman script to create encrypted writings that could only be deciphered by trained members. Candles were always lit in odd numbers, symbolizing balance between life and death. A ritual bell would chime 3 times at the start and end of every meeting, echoing ancient pre-colonial customs of invoking spirits before important gatherings. Small wooden altars often bore crucifixes, native Anito statues, or skull motifs representing the unity of ancestral tradition and Catholic martyrdom. Initiates wore ceremonial robes during higher-level gatherings, white for purity, red for courage, and black for sacrifice. The highest-ranking leaders, known as the Supremo and sometimes carried staffs or daggers as symbols of authority during major council assemblies. Oaths were not simple recitations. They were layered invocations. The Pananampa NG Katipunan was spoken aloud with solemnity. Ako, Ananampa, na buong puso at kaluluwa, ay yahalay kohang, haking sarili sa dakilang arikain enehe Katipuna, hangin, esay mamate, hangli maito, ay haking ingatan, halanggalang, sa hating bayang. I swear with all my heart and soul to dedicate myself to the great cause of the Katip. Until death, I shall guard this secret for the sake of our nation. But perhaps one of the most haunting aspects of the Katipunan rituals was the Eurasian prayers whispered for protection. Blending indigenous incantations and Catholic prayers, members called upon divine intervention to shield them from betrayal and death. Amulets known as anting-ganting were often worn beneath their shirts, etched with Latin phrases or ancient symbols. Some of these anting-ganting were believed to offer invincibility against bullets, a belief that would fuel the fearless charges of Katipuneros during early battles. Others bore the Tres Personas Solo Dios symbol, or the mystic eye of God, believed to ward off Spanish detection. In certain provinces, like Cavite, subgroups developed even more elaborate internal ranks. Factions like the Magdawang and Magdalo sometimes incorporated unique badges, secret knock codes, and encoded messages buried within folk songs and chants. Women played a central but often overlooked role in these hidden rituals. Female members, sometimes called the Sangguniang Babae, were entrusted with carrying coded messages, tending to wounded fighters, and even performing initiation ceremonies for new recruits. Their bravery added another layer of depth to the Katipunan's secret network. Even today, many details of these rituals remain speculative. The few surviving written descriptions often came from captured Katipuneros, under torture or from Spanish informants' accounts, biased by fear or misunderstanding. Much of the Brotherhood's inner world was never written down, but pastorally, adding layers of mystery that modern historians still attempt to unravel. The rituals of the Katipunan were more than superstition or drama. They forged unbreakable bonds between ordinary Filipinos who risked everything for an idea larger than themselves, a sovereign Filipino nation. Through blood, oaths, and sacred rites, the revolution became not merely political, but profoundly spiritual. The suppressed secrets of Spanish archives. As the Philippine Revolution raged across Luzon and beyond, the Spanish authorities were not blind to the vast web of the... In fact, the Spanish colonial government quietly amassed an enormous collection of intelligence files, secret reports, and confessions related to the Brotherhood. These archives, however, became part of a far more secretive game of suppression and control, one whose shadows still linger in the folds of history. Throughout the revolution, captured Katipuneros were subjected to brutal interrogations. Some willingly revealed information under promises of leniency. Others spoke under the pressure of torture. Spanish officers recorded these testimonies in highly classified reports, compiling detailed lists of names, meeting locations, secret symbols, and suspected rebel safe houses. But the accuracy of these records was always uncertain. The fear of informants and false accusations ran rampant. Entire families were sometimes denounced over petty disputes. While genuine revolutionaries often managed to slip through unnoticed, the colonial government's own confusion further added to the chaotic patchwork of the intelligence file. The Guardia Civil, the feared colonial police, skipped their own detailed ledgers, cross-referenced with reports from friars and military officers. In some cases, confiscated Katipunan documents were translated into Spanish and stored in secret vaults, meant to be used as both historical record and legal justification for continued repression. When American forces captured Manila and seized control of the Philippines, many of these Spanish archives vanished. Some were deliberately destroyed by fleeing Spanish authorities to prevent their contents from falling into rebel or American hands. Others were shipped back to Spain, where they were absorbed into dusty colonial record rooms. To this day, some researchers believe that forgotten collections of Katipunan documents still sit inside locked government archives in Madrid, untranslated and largely unknown to modern Filipino historians. These lost Spanish archives may contain first-hand testimonies of lesser-known revolutionaries, details of secret Katipunan rituals, and entire branches of the Brotherhood whose stories were never publicly told. In recent years, limited access has been granted to select Filipino scholars studying in Spain. What they've uncovered is tantalizing. Coded letters signed by Katipunan officers, confiscated recruitment rosters, partial confessions filled with contradictions, and even failed Spanish attempts to decipher certain ritual texts. The Spanish archives also revealed the degree of paranoia the revolution inspired. Internal reports describe priests accusing each other of sympathizing with rebels. Spanish soldiers often exaggerated the strength of Katipunan forces to justify additional funding and reinforcements. Even high-ranking Spanish officials privately expressed doubt about their ability to maintain control. One of the most intriguing discoveries involved partial transcripts of captured Katipunan interrogations detailing secret locations where weapons caches were supposedly hidden. Yet searches conducted by Spanish troops sometimes yielded nothing, either because the information was false, outdated, or the Katipuneros had already moved their supplies elsewhere. Had the Spanish maintained control longer, these archives might have served as the foundation for sweeping mass arrests. But with the arrival of the Americans, much of this intelligence became obsolete overnight. What wasn't lost or destroyed remains buried deep within foreign archives, silent witnesses to the chaotic final years of Spanish rule. For modern historians, these suppressed secrets offer both frustration and hope. Each newly discovered document has the potential to rewrite portions of Philippine revolutionary history, offering fresh perspectives on the courage, betrayal, and sheer complexity of the Katipunan struggle. But for now, much remains hidden, trapped behind locked doors, aging parchment, and bureaucratic silence thousands of miles from the islands where the revolution was born.
The underground networks, secret Katipunan safe houses, and hidden routes, while many imagine the Katipunan as an army hiding in forests or gathering only in city basements, the reality was far more intricate. To keep the revolution alive while under constant surveillance, they developed an impressive network of safe, hidden passageways and secret escape routes that crisscrossed both urban Manila and rural provinces. Imagine yourself as a courier in 1896. By day, you're a simple vendor, selling fruits in the market, blending into the crowded streets of but at night, you carry crucial documents, encoded letters, orders from the Supremo, or secret membership lists. Your job is to deliver them across districts crawling with Guardia civil patrols. A single misstep means imprisonment or death. Many of these safe houses belonged to trusted illustrados or sympathizers of the revolution. Wealthy merchant homes often had trapdoors beneath floorboards, leading to narrow crawl spaces where documents, weapons, or fugitives could be hidden. Others had concealed attic compartments, lined with hay or cloth to muffle sound, preventing guards from hearing anyone hiding above. Some older stone houses, or bahena, had underground storage rooms or old water cisterns that were converted into temporary bunkers. These vaults could shelter multiple Katipuneros for days as they waited for the next opportunity to move. Rural areas offered even more creative hiding spots. In Bulacan, deep bamboo thickets concealed entrances to underground tunnels dug by local farmers loyal to the cause. These passageways sometimes stretched hundreds of meters, connecting villages to hidden riverbanks, where boats awaited at night. Certain churches, ironically built during the Spanish period, became temporary sanctuaries for rebel leaders. Behind massive stone altars or beneath sacristy floors, some parishes concealed revolutionary documents and supplies with the quiet approval of sympathetic Filipino priests. Communication was its own form of espionage art. Women were frequently used as couriers, hiding tiny slips of paper in their hair buns or sewing messages into the lining of their clothes. Children acted as lookouts, playing games on street corners while keeping watch for Guardia civil patrols. Even ordinary objects became tools of secrecy. Hollowed-out bamboo canes could store tiny maps or gold coins for funding rebel operations. Cooking pots had false bottoms where documents could be stashed, safe even during random home inspections. Many of these routes relied on complex codes. For example, a lantern hanging on a certain balcony at night could signal that the path was clear. A white cloth tied on a fence might mean danger ahead. Entire neighborhoods quietly coordinated these signals, forming a silent but efficient intelligence web. Travel between provinces was even riskier. Couriers disguised as traveling merchants often transported guns dismantled into farming tools or stuffed inside bundles of rice. Boats quietly crossed rivers under moonlight, guided by local fishermen who knew every bend and current. In the mountains, hunters guided catapenaros through narrow trails, invisible to most outsiders. Perhaps one of the most famous networks operated between Manila and Cavite, where key factions like Magdiwang and Magdalo coordinated their war efforts. Messages traveled from one town to another, with each leg handled by a separate courier who only knew a fragment of the entire route, minimizing the risk if one was captured. The brilliance of these underground networks allowed the Katipunan to survive its most dangerous early year. Even as Spanish raids intensified, they created a living, breathing organism of resistance that adapted constantly, always staying one step ahead of the colonial authorities. Today, many of these safe houses have been demolished or forgotten, their secret tunnels collapsed beneath modern streets. Yet beneath Manila's concrete and the farms of Bulacan, echoes of the Katipunan's invisible pathways still linger, hidden under centuries of history. The unsolved betrayals, double agents, informants, and the fall of secrecy. As with any secret organization, the greatest threat to the Katipunan often came from within. Betrayals, whether by fear, greed, or desperation, led to some of the most devastating blows against the revolution. To this day, some of these betrayals remain unsolved, their informants never fully exposed. In the tense summer of 1896, Spanish authorities began receiving unusually precise information about Katipunan members. Raids became more surgical, capturing not just rank-and-file members but key organizers, who had managed to stay hidden for years. The sudden efficiency of these arrests suggested that insiders were feeding information to the colonial government. One of the most infamous accusations involved Teodoro Patino, a printer at Diario de Manila, who revealed the existence of the Katipunan after a personal argument with fellow member Apolonio de la Cruz. Patino's confession led directly to multiple arrests and the exposure of a major printing press used by the revolutionaries. His motivations remain debated. Was it fear, personal jealousy, or genuine regret? Yet Patico's case may have been only the tip of the iceberg. Rumors swirled about other, more deeply embedded informants who operated for months or even years without exposure. Some were lower-ranked Katipuneros who cracked under torture. Others may have been recruited by Spanish authorities long before the revolution formally erupted. The Spanish Guardia Civil actively recruited Filipino collaborators, often offering money, land or promises of protection for families in exchange for information. In certain towns, local elites under pressure from the Friars quietly provided names to avoid losing their own One of the most painful betrayals involved leaks that led to the capture of Bonifacio's personal correspondences. Spanish authorities used this intelligence to target key rebel cells and preempt planned uprisings in several provinces. The movement's most elaborate plans were often sabotaged before they could be executed. Even within the Katipunan's own leadership, mistrust grew. Divisions between factions like the Magdalo and Magdiwang in Cavite sometimes led to mutual suspicion. Accusations of disloyalty or incompetence circulated privately, fueling internal rifts that weakened the revolutionary front. Some betrayal cases remain unsolved mysteries. The sudden collapse of certain safe houses, the unexplained failure of specific raids, or the quiet disappearances of well-known Katipuneros hint at deeper levels of infiltration that were never publicly acknowledged. The nature of these betrayals created a cloud of paranoia that never fully lifted. Members became increasingly hesitant to trust new recruits. Interrogations became harsher. Initiation rituals grew even more intense to ensure loyalty. Spanish officials exploited this internal distrust by planting false rumors, forging documents, and spreading deliberate disinformation. Some supposed informants may have been invented entirely to sow confusion and discord within rebel ranks. To this day, some families quietly carry the shameful legacy of ancestors accused of being collaborators, while others fiercely defend their relatives' innocence. The truth, buried under generations of silence and missing documents, may never be fully revealed. In the end, while courage and sacrifice define the Katipunan's legacy, the shadow of betrayal remains one of its most haunting mysteries. A reminder that even in the noblest of causes, human weakness can crack the strongest oaths. Life of the Gobernadorcillo, life among the local elite, the Principalia, remained outwardly calm. These were the native Filipinos who had secured positions of influence under Spanish rule, navigating a fragile balance between their colonial masters and the restless masses beneath them. You find yourself in this world not as a rebel, but as a Gobernadorcillo, the highest-ranking native official in a provincial town. At sunrise, you rise from your hardwood four-poster bed, its legs resting in bowls of oil to keep ants away. Servants have already prepared your morning sakale thick and bitter, accompanied by sweet native bread and imported butter. The air is humid but quiet. Your home, a large Bahay na Bato, stands sturdily with its stone base, capis, shell windows, and wide wooden balconies. It serves as both your residence and your office, where you will receive both the townspeople and Spanish friars throughout the day. Your duties are heavy. As gobernadorcillo, you serve as judge, tax collector, census taker, and police supervisor. While you are native, your authority flows from the Spanish crown. Every decision must balance the interests of the Spanish officials and friars, who oversee you, and the townspeople who expect your protection. In your office, villagers arrive one by one, bowing respectfully. A farmer seeks leniency on his unpaid land tax, blaming the failed harvest. A fisherman reports that his son has been conscripted by the Guardia civil. A widow begs for protection against abusive debt collectors. Every petition carries weight, but you must tread carefully. Too much sympathy angers your superiors. Too much obedience invites resentment from your neighbors. The friar arrives, mid-morning, his black cassock absorbing the heat. Though technically an advisor, the friar's influence eclipses yours in many ways. He controls the church records, the vital registry of births, deaths, marriages, and property rights. His opinion can make or break your tenure. Lunch is taken with selected town officials, the cabezas de barangay, who oversee smaller neighborhoods and report directly to you. Over steaming rice, salted fish, and stewed vegetables, you quietly discuss local gossip, new edicts from Manila, and rumors of unrest. All the while, eyes dart and voices lower when discussing whispers of the cat. By afternoon, you oversee the collection of tributo, the dreaded tax imposed on every Filipino family. Many cannot afford it, forcing them into labor drafts or worse, risking imprisonment. While you empathize with their plight, your own family's status depends on meeting collection quotas demanded by the Spanish administrators. Late in the day, you supervise the town's unpaid labor force, TPOLE, Servicio system. Men work under the scorching sun, repairing roads, clearing forests, or building bridges. Though this service is technically for public good, it is often abused by corrupt officials, including some of your own subordinates. You turn a blind eye, knowing that challenging this system might cost you your post. Dinner is quieter, taken with family in the dimly lit dining hall. Imported plates and silverware rest on woven mats. Outside, servants light oil lamps to keep mosquitoes at bay. Your children study Spanish prayers by candlelight, their future dependent on securing education from the friar-controlled schools. As night falls, you retreat to your office, reviewing ledgers by oil lamp. The names of delinquent taxpayers haunt you, names you recognize, families you know personally. You wonder how long this fragile peace will hold. The rumors of secret meetings in the hills grow louder. Some of your own distant relatives have already disappeared, whispered to have joined the Kati. You are caught in an impossible position. To resist openly invites Spanish punishment. To cooperate too closely makes you a traitor in the eyes of your own people. Every day is a careful performance, maintaining dignity while preserving survival. As you blow out the final candle, you realize you live comfortably, yet you are not truly free. Like so many in the Principalia, you wear fine clothing, but walk a narrow bridge above a rising storm. The hidden wealth of the Friars. Power, land, and control beyond even the gobernadorcillo stood a far more powerful and untouchable class. The Friars, the Spanish frails, were not simply religious leaders. They were economic titans, landlords, political kingmakers, and the true enforcers of colonial authority. To understand the true scope of their power, you must walk into one of their sprawling estates, the haciendas, which stretched across much of the archipelago. At dawn, the friar rises in his stone convent, his daily schedule blending prayer with administration. His breakfast includes imported chocolate, Spanish sausages, and tropical fruits grown on his vast lands, tended entirely by native tenant farmers under harsh terms. These haciendas are kingdoms unto themselves. While the Spanish government in Manila technically rules the colony, real power often flows through the friars, who control land ownership, water access, and even legal disputes in their territories. Peasants work the fields under the oppressive sharecropping system known as casa. They plant sugar, rice, tobacco, or coconuts, delivering most of the harvest to the friar's warehouse. In return, they are allowed to keep just enough to survive. Any shortfalls or debts accumulate rapidly, binding entire families into generational poverty. The friar's control extends into every aspect of life. Baptisms, marriages, and funerals require payments to the church. Schooling is limited and heavily religious, ensuring the population remains obedient and illiterate in political matters. Even legal disputes between villagers are often mediated by the friar rather than civil courts. The friar's word carries greater weight than local officials. He writes personal reports to Spanish governors, recommending promotions or removals of town leaders. His friendships with the Guardia Civil allow him to summon armed escorts when necessary, protecting his interests through both divine authority and earthly force. Inside his convent, vast storerooms hold imported goods, Spanish wine, French fabrics, fine china. The walls display paintings of saints and wealthy donors. Hidden safes contain ledgers, documenting the growing wealth extracted from native labor. While publicly living simply, many friars quietly accumulate personal fortunes. Profits from haciendas are often invested back into Spain, enriching monasteries and noble families far removed from the islands they exploit. Their unchecked power fuels deep resentment. Among ordinary Filipinos, the friars are both feared and hated, symbols of both religious oppression and economic exploitation. Stories circulate of forced confessions, illegal land seizures, and abuses of power hidden behind confessional secrecy. Even within the Catholic Church, some voices in Spain criticize the friars' dominance, calling for reforms. But in the distant colony, such criticisms carry little weight. The friars continue their reign, shielded by distance, bureaucracy, and their crucial role in maintaining colonial stability. As dusk settles over the hacienda, the friar walks his garden, rosary in hand, confident in his position. Beyond his walls, however, revolution brews. The Katipunan grows. The Ilustrados speak of reform, and even some within the Spanish ranks question how long this fragile structure can endure. But for now, the friar sleeps peacefully, certain that God and the colonial system remain firmly on his side. The colonial ballrooms, the lavish social life of the Spanish mestizos. While much of the archipelago toiled under the heat of labor drafts and oppressive taxes, there existed another world, one of chandeliers, polished marble floors, and glittering gowns. This was the rarefied air of the Spanish mestizo class, those born from the unions of Spanish fathers and native or Chinese Filipino mothers, who occupied a complex position in colonial society. You enter this world not as a laborer or official, but as a young mestizo attending your first grand ball in Manila's walled city. The year is 1894, and the Gobernador General himself is hosting the affair, in honor of visiting dignitaries from Madrid. As your carriage pulls up, servants in crisp uniforms open the doors, helping you down onto polished cobblestone streets. The massive stone building towers above you, its facade lit by oil lanterns that flicker in the humid night air. Music floats from the windows, the swelling notes of a European waltz played by a live string ensemble. Inside, the grand hall gleams under rows of imported crystal chandeliers. The floor is freshly waxed, reflecting the swirling colors of silk gowns and formal military uniforms. The guests are a mixture of powerful Spaniards, high-ranking friars, wealthy Chinese merchants, and the rising mestizo elite, families who have grown rich through land holdings, tobacco contracts, or government appointments. Your family as well. Your father, a respected businessman, wears a tailored black chaqueta with a starched white shirt and polished boots, imported from Madrid. Your mother wears an elaborate terno gown, with wide butterfly sleeves and intricate embroidery painstakingly sewn by local artisans. As you are introduced to the Governor General's wife, she smiles politely, remarking on your excellent Spanish. You know well that your family has ability to speak Castilian fluently. Unlike many native-born Filipinos, serves as both a social ladder and a barrier. It allows entrance into these halls, but also marks you as distinct from both Spaniards and your own countrymen. Waiters glide across the floor, balancing silver trays laden with wine glasses, small pastries, and sweet tropical fruits. A chef trained in Madrid oversees the preparation of elaborate dishes blending Spanish and native ingredients leche and paella and relenong manak, garnished with spices and herbs from across the archipelago. The music shifts to a lively rigadandiana, and young couples take to the floor, their careful steps rehearsed for months in private lesson. Dancing well is not just entertainment, it is a display of refinement, an advertisement of a family's readiness to enter or maintain its place within the colonial upper class. Conversations swirl around trade agreements, political appointments, and rumors of unrest in the Some quietly mention the writings of Rizal, whose novels have begun to circulate more widely. Others dismiss these as mere fiction, confident that Spain's control remains unshakable. Yet beneath the laughter and clinking glasses, a quiet tension hums. The rise of educated Filipinos, the Ilustrados, threatens to blur the strict racial lines that uphold colonial order. The wealthy mestizos walk a careful line. They benefit from the system but sense the distant rumblings of change. As the night progresses, imported cigars are lit, and conversations become more intimate. Fathers discuss business arrangements. Mothers negotiate future marriages for their children. Young men compare European education opportunities, while young women trade the latest gossip from convent schools. By midnight, the ball winds down. Carriages arrive once more, rolling into the narrow streets of Intramuros, carrying their glittering passengers back to their gated mansion. Servants bow as you pass, and the city's poorer districts lie in darkness beyond the stone walls. You retire for the night, aware that while your world is one of privilege, it is also one of uncertainty. The old order feels unshakable tonight. But how long can such glittering towers stand on foundations built over simmering discontent? The women of the elite, silent power behind the curtain in colonial Philippine society, women of the elite class lived behind a curtain of lace and formality. While men held public offices and signed land contracts, elite women wielded their influence in more subtle, but no less powerful ways. Imagine yourself now as a young mestiza, in your family's expansive Baja. Your morning begins before sunrise as the household servants prepare breakfast. Hot cocoa, rice cakes, and tropical fruits laid out on narrow wood tables, polished to a mirror shine. You spend your first hours overseeing the servants, who number dozens, cooks, maids, gardeners, and carriage drivers. While your father negotiates with merchants or visits government officers, your mother manages the estate's daily affairs, organizing the household accounts, ensuring debts are paid, ordering imported fabrics, and scheduling your younger siblings' religious instruction. Women like your mother maintain the family's reputation, which in this rigid society is everything. Every social call, every charity donation, every letter exchanged with distant relatives in Madrid or Hong Kong reflects upon your family's standing. By mid-morning, you sit with a tutor, often a Spanish-speaking friar or private instructor, reviewing lessons in Spanish grammar, catechism, embroidery, and piano. Education for elite women is designed to prepare you for marriage, not for public life. But it creates a quiet sophistication that allows you to navigate the complex expectations of your class. Afternoons are spent practicing music or supervising younger siblings, while seamstresses present samples of new European fabrics to consider for your next ball gown. Servants bring updates from the market, rumors about other elite families, possible arranged matches, and, increasingly, quiet whispers of political unrest. In private, your mother discusses with you the subtler aspects of power, how to secure advantageous marriages, how to manage household negotiations, and how to maintain influence through personal networks of godparents, priests, and family allies. At evening social gatherings, your role is to represent the family with grace. You offer polite conversation, demonstrate your piano skills, and charm potential suitors, all while avoiding even the faintest hint of scandal. The unspoken rule: a woman may not engage in politics directly, but her beauty, wit, and virtue are powerful currency. Yet behind these delicate rituals lies a growing awareness. Many women of your generation read forbidden books, the novels of banned pamphlets from Europe, letters from brothers studying abroad. Over embroidery circles and afternoon teas, women quietly debate the future of the Philippines. Some elite women become secret supporters of the growing reform movement, using their social positions to relay information, raise funds, or protect fugitive family members. While they appear as dutiful daughters and wives, they sometimes serve as silent partners in the growing wave of resistance. As night falls, you retire to your spacious bedroom, where Capi's shell windows filter the moonlight. Outside, beyond the safety of your gated home, the unrest grows louder. But for now, you sleep peacefully, knowing that tomorrow, you will once again step into the carefully choreographed dance of elite society, where power moves behind whispered words, exchanged glances, and arranged alliances. The Manila business elite, Chinese Filipino tycoons in the colonial economy, while much of the colonial social structure was organized along rigid racial lines. There existed a powerful class that quietly fueled the colony's economy: the Chinese Filipino merchant elite. These families, often referred to as the Sangli Mestizos, were key players in trade, finance, and urban development, operating in a space both inside and outside Spanish authority. You now step into the shoes of one such merchant in the thriving business district of Binondo, Manila. It's the late 1890s. The air smells of spices, roasted peanuts, and burning oil from street vendors, cooking morning snacks for workers and shoppers. Your day begins early, just after sunrise, inside your family's bahay na bato along the Pasig River. The house is large but practical, a blend of Chinese and Spanish influences with carved wooden panels, intricate lattice work, and colorful porcelain decorations imported from Canton. As head of the family business, your first task is reviewing ledgers meticulously kept by hired accountants. The business spans multiple ventures: textile imports from Hong Kong, rice shipments from Pampanga, sugar contracts with haciendas in Negros, and even small banking services for other merchants. Binondo bustles as porters unload crates from riverboats. Spanish customs officers collect their dues, but your family's long-standing connections help navigate the complex web of regulations. Small bribes smooth most transactions. Larger negotiations are handled over formal dinners with officials. By mid-morning, You meet with Spanish officials at the Maintaining good relations with colonial authorities is essential. Licenses, contracts, and protection all depend on these delicate partnerships. Though you are not fully accepted into the inner circle of the Peninsulares, your financial influence earns their cautious respect. Lunch is a lavish affair shared with visiting partners from Cebu and Delaware. Bowls of shark fin soup, roasted duck, and native seafood are served on imported china. Discussions turn to shipping routes, foreign tariffs, and the volatile prices of sugar and hemp on the global market. In the afternoon, you oversee the operations of your small lending house, one of the earliest forms of local banking. Spanish soldiers, friars, and even native officials borrow money here, their credit secured by land titles, business shares, or future crops. Interest rates are high, but demand is constant in a colony with limited financial institutions. Your network extends beyond Manila. Telegrams arrive from Hong Kong with news of the latest European market fluctuations. Letters from relatives in Amoy update you on silk prices. Secretaries translate foreign correspondence into Castilian for official filings. Despite your wealth, social restrictions remain. The Spanish elite never fully accept you into their highest circles, and racial prejudice lingers in subtle ways. Marriage alliances are carefully negotiated within the Chinese-Filipino community, blending commerce with social advancement. In private, you quietly donate funds to both Spanish-run charities and underground nationalist groups. Like many in your position, you hedge your bets. Loyal to Spain in public, cautiously supportive of reform behind closed doors. Survival requires adaptability. As evening falls, you join a banquet hosted by another prominent Sangli Mestizo family. Over rounds of tuba and Spanish wine, guests debate the rumors of revolt. The Katipunan's growing presence is whispered about, but few speak openly. Business must continue, regardless of who holds power. Late at night, you return home. The servants extinguish the oil lamps, leaving only the flicker of candlelight. The Pasig River flows silently outside. The colony feels stable tonight, but you know better change is coming. And like every shrewd merchant, you are ready to adapt when it arrives. The Guardia Civil, the iron fist of Spanish rule, while the Spanish administrators, friars, and business elites held power through wealth and influence. The Guardia Civil enforced order with steel and fear. They were the muscle behind the colonial machine, the constant presence ensuring compliance among a restless population. You now take the role of a Guardia Civil corporal stationed in a provincial town just outside Manila. The sun rises early, casting orange light over the town square as you inspect your patrol. Your uniform is heavy and stifling in the humid air. Dark woolen jacket, leather belt, and rifle slung over your shoulder. The barracks where you sleep are sparse. Simple wooden beds, shared rations, and a tiny office stacked with arrest records. Most of your fellow soldiers are not from Spain, but recruited from the local loyalists, or even former rebels seeking favor. Your duties are what? By mid-morning, you lead a patrol through surrounding villages, ensuring that taxes have been collected and that no unauthorized gatherings are taking place. Any suspicious gatherings, even religious meetings, require immediate reports. Peasants bow as you pass, offering forced smiles. You are not welcomed but deeply feared. Stories circulate of Guardia Civil brutality, summary executions, illegal searches, forced confessions. Whether entirely true or not, the rumors alone keep many in line. Later in the day, you oversee the conscription of young men for the Polo y Servicio labor drafts. Some weep openly, knowing they will be gone for months, working harsh jobs under dangerous conditions. You enforce the quota mercilessly. Disobedience cannot be tolerated. At the local convent, you meet with a friar to discuss potential subversives. The friar informs you of certain families refusing to contribute adequately to the church. These names are quietly added to your list for future surveillance. Your authority is nearly absolute in these remote regions. Village leaders dare not cross you, for fear of arrest or worse. You settle land disputes, collect fines, and sometimes personally profit from bribes and extortion. As night falls, you receive word from an informant. A suspected Catapanero is hiding nearby. You and your men ride through the darkness, torches in hand, surrounding a small hut on the edge of the forest. The suspect is dragged from his home, beaten, and taken to the barracks for interrogation. Inside the dim holding cell, crude methods are employed to extract confession. Whether or not he is truly a rebel often matters less than demonstrating to the village that resistance is futile. Fear is your most effective tool. By midnight, you submit your report to the provincial governor, who cares more about stability than justice. As long as the quotas are met, the roads are safe, and tax revenues flow to Manila, your methods are not questioned. You retire to your quarters, your rifle resting against the wall. Outside, the town remains silent under your watchful eye. Yet you know that beneath the surface, hatred simmers. The more force you apply, the more enemies you create. But for now, your orders are clear. Tomorrow, the patrol resumes. The ending, the fragile illusion of order. The Spanish colonial system, with its rigid hierarchy, glittering elites, and brutal projected an image of stability and control that seemed unshakable to those living comfortably within its embrace. The Mestizo elites danced in polished ballrooms. The Chinese Filipino merchants balanced profit and politics. The Guardia civil patrolled with cold efficiency. Yet, beneath this elaborate choreography of power, cracks were forming. The contradictions of colonial rule became harder to ignore as whispers of rebellion grew louder. The same ballrooms that once hosted European dignitaries now echoed with rumors of ilustrados returning from Europe, armed not with swords but with dangerous new ideas, nationalism, and the radical notion that the Filipino people deserved even among the business elite, once content to profit under Spanish rule. Questions began to rise. What would happen if the revolution succeeded? Which families would fall, and which would adapt to a new order? Some quietly funneled funds to rebel leaders, while publicly reaffirming loyalty to Madrid. The Friars, once the unchallenged moral authority of the islands, now faced growing resentment. Their land holdings, their political meddling, their control over education, all came under increasing scrutiny. Students read forbidden texts beneath the flicker of candlelight, absorbing ideas that would soon set the nation ablaze. For the orderly Filipino laborers, tenant farmers, and artisans, the burdens became unbearable. Forced labor, crippling taxes, and relentless abuses by local officials had created a boiling pressure. The Guardia Civil could whip bodies and burn villages, but they could not erase the collective memory of injustice. Then, the spark ignited. In 1896, the Katipunan, once a secret society meeting in candlelit backrooms, erupted into open revolution. Villagers who once bowed to the Guardia Civil now took up bolos and rifles. Entire provinces rose in defiance, their rage fueled by centuries of exploitation. The illusion of colonial harmony shattered almost overnight. The same carriages that once carried Spanish officials through safe streets now sat abandoned. The same ballrooms that once echoed with laughter were emptied as families fled. Even the most loyal elites found themselves caught between two worlds. Too Filipino for Madrid, too privileged for the revolutionary. And yet, amid the chaos, a new identity was being forged. Not Spanish, not Chinese, not purely indigenous, but something uniquely Filipino. The centuries-long experiment of Spanish rule was coming to its violent and inevitable conclusion. The Philippines would never be the same. The long, slow fade of empire, and so, as we draw the curtains closed on this long, meandering journey through the often uncomfortable, rarely glamorous, but endlessly fascinating corridors of Philippine colonial history, you may find your mind drifting, not only from fatigue, but from the vast, intricate complexity of it all. For over 3 centuries, this tropical archipelago was held in the tightening grip of an empire that sought to transform distant islands into mirror images of itself. But empires, like all human constructs, are fragile. They stand not on divine right, but on the backs of those who carry them. willingly or otherwise. The bustling streets of Benunda, with their merchants haggling over porcelain, silk, and spices, quietly underwrote the colonial economy. The Grand Bahay Naboto mansions of Intramuros echoed with carefully staged social rituals designed to maintain appearances, even as uncertainty loomed like gathering storm clouds. The Friars, resplendent in their ecclesiastical robes, presided over souls while amassing lands and power that would eventually fuel resentment. The Guardia Civil, rifle in hand, maintained order through fear, yet could never fully extinguish the embers of discontent that glowed beneath the surface of every village, every barrio, every tenant, farmer's hut. You've now wandered through lavish ballrooms, where whispered intrigues unfolded beneath Christosham. You've marched alongside grim-faced soldiers, enforcing the king's will with cold efficiency. You've glimpsed the careful maneuverings of powerful merchant clans who played both sides of every power struggle. And you've sat quietly in the parlor rooms of elite women, the silent diplomats of family legacy. But in the end, no amount of ceremony, wealth, or musket-bearing patrols could permanently contain the growing Filipino identity that pulsed beneath the colonial mask. The Spanish Empire, once a giant stretching across oceans, would falter, worn down not by foreign armies, but by the swelling voices of those it sought to control. The archipelago's destiny would shift into the hands of new rulers, but the seeds planted during these long centuries of colonial entanglement would forever shape what it means to be Filipino, a culture forged from resilience, negotiation, hybrid identities, and an unyielding will to define its own path. And as your breathing slows, as your eyes grow heavier, as the quiet hum of history wraps itself around you like a thick tropical night, you rest in the knowledge that even in the most oppressive systems, the human story never truly sleeps. History, like dreams, drifts endlessly forward, patient, quiet, and always waiting to be